Welcome everybody, hello. We are here for Connecticut River Conservancy's live stream, episode 9, our first of 2 trash talks this season that we run annually after our Source to Sea cleanup. My name is Stacy Leonard and I plan events here for CRC, and I'm also the Source to Sea cleanup coordinator. We're really happy to have so many people joining us today for this really important conversation about plastics. For those who are new to LiveStream, I just want to share, this is has been a bi-weekly lunchtime presentation series that we launched this spring in our efforts to bring our rivers to you. And today we're delighted to have 2 special guests who I'll introduce shortly, in addition to some of our river stewards, to share their expertise on the subject of plastics. Unfortunately, some of the most ubiquitous items found annually during our river cleanups. From microplastics and plastic trash in our waterways to the ways COVID-19 has impacted our plastic use, we'll look at what CRC and these organizations are doing locally and regionally across our 4 river states and discuss long-term solutions to prevent our rivers from getting trashed in the first place. Before we move into the conversation, just a couple of live stream updates and a little housekeeping. We do have 2 more live streams scheduled this fall. One is a celebration of World Fish Migration Day on October 28th. And then our second trash talk that's part of this series on the subject of tires will be on November 18th. This conversation is being recorded, and all of the links to register for the other live streams and many resources and actions that you can take after this conversation on the topic of plastics will be shared by email today. We welcome your questions in the chat box and we will field them at the end of the conversation. We'll try to get to as many as possible. So now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. We have Kathy Urfer and Andrea Donlin, 2 of CRC's river stewards who will lead us off. Followed by Melissa Gates, who is the Northeast Regional Manager of Surfrider, and Kirstie Pecci, the Director of the Zero Waste Project at Conservation Law Foundation. It's going to be an exciting conversation, so without further ado, take it away, Kathy.
Great, thanks Stacy so much. And thanks so much to Melissa and Kirstie for joining us today. Aliki, can you go to the next slide? None of this work can be done alone, and we all lean on each other for advocacy and support, and expertise. Both CLF and Surfrider are great partners in our region, and so we wanted to bring them into our conversation here and highlight their work as well. So next slide, Aliki, please. So we have been picking up the garbage in our rivers here along the Connecticut for decades, and we want it to stop. We'd love to see some changes in how products are made and how our waste stream is handled to incentivize a major paradigm shift to a circular economy. At this point, humanity knows full well that there is no way anymore, and it is time to stop creating trash. We need to push back against big corporations who are making money from a single-use economy while putting the burden on the rest of us, literally us, to clean up after them. So next slide, Aliki. So in addition to picking up the garbage, CRC has been working to help forward policy to stop trash before it starts. As part of that effort, for several years, we've been organizing these trash talks to educate folks about what they can do to help and to understand better the waste stream in general. Because of what we find during the Source to Sea cleanup, CRC's main trash advocacy focus has been on 3 things. Next slide, Aliki. We have decided to focus on single-use plastics, polystyrene, dock floats, and tires. And we'll clearly spend the rest of the time here talking about plastics, but so just a quick segue to talk about our polystyrene work and the tire work. So one of the things we've noticed in the cleanup every year is we're finding huge chunks of polystyrene that we have discovered are actually the bottom part of often homemade docks. So when people are putting docks in the river, these big chunks of polystyrene are used to float the docks. And so we have started a campaign to try to ask people to swap their dock. Can you go then to the next slide, Aliki? Swap your dock for cleaner rivers. One of the things we found is that by making docks with enclosed polystyrene, it's actually cheaper over the life of the dock. And so we have a lot of information on our website about polystyrene dock floats, what alternatives there are, and also, you know, some advocacy, possibly legislative work that we're trying to put in place to essentially make these unenclosed polystyrene docks not something we could put in our rivers anymore. Next slide. In addition to the polystyrene dock floats, we are also tired of tires. We are cleaning up decades and decades of waste tires. There's still illegal tire dumping going on, and we are still finding huge dump grounds, hundreds of tires every year where we're pulling them out. So most of our waste tires are sent to one plant in Maine to be burned as tire-derived fuel. And that's for all of New England, which is not the best use for what are really some important raw resources that go into tire production. Because of the regional market associated with tires, CRC feels that an extended producer responsibility process may be the best option for dealing with our waste tire stream. And so, as Stacy mentioned, we do have another trash talk coming up planned for November 18th, which is focused on tires, where we can dig in a little more and really kind of understand tires and the waste stream. So on to plastics. Next slide, please, Maliki. CRC has focused our efforts on helping to support our many partners working on single-use plastic legislation as one way to deal with our single-use plastic issues. In addition, we have applied for and received a microplastic sampling grant to begin to understand the plastic pollution load in our local rivers. And Andrea, our Massachusetts River Steward, will fill us in on the details of that and how you might be able to help out.
All right, thanks, Kathy. I'm Andrea Donlin. I focus on the Massachusetts part of the watershed. And we were recently awarded a grant through the Mass Environmental Trust, which is the Environmental License Plate Grant Fund in Massachusetts. Plus we have some funding from Conservation Law Foundation to do a sampling program along the Connecticut River looking for microplastics. There's been a lot of information in the news about teeny tiny amounts of plastic in our waterways, and we were curious about how much or whether we could even find microplastics in the Connecticut River. So we also have some additional funding from Ocean Conservancy, and we're going to attempt to take some samples outside of Massachusetts. The MET funds are only for Massachusetts projects. So we're really excited about that. We are going to use some of our existing volunteers and staff to sort of iron out the kinks this winter and do a test run and then start up the program next summer. So we'll probably be looking for volunteers to collect some samples or do some lab work. We're going to be buying some microscopes and doing analysis of microplastics in our samples. So I think this will be the first, well, not only the first microplastics monitoring on the Connecticut River, but I wasn't able to find any other information about rivers in Massachusetts. So this will be interesting to see.
Great, thanks, Andrea. So now, Aliki, next slide, please. We will do a rundown of what's happening state by state. I am the Vermont and New Hampshire River Steward along with Ron Rhodes, and so I'll just give a little update on what's happened in Vermont regarding plastics. In 2019, the Vermont legislature passed Act 69, which is a broad bill to reduce single-use plastics and consider some waste stream issues in the state. So what that means is as of July 1st, 2020, Vermont stores and food establishments are no longer providing plastic carry-out bags, plastic straws, plastic stirrers, or expanded polystyrene food containers. Stores can provide a paper bag and charge 10 cents for that, and that 10-cent charge is to incentivize people bringing their own reusable bags. Additionally, this bill created a single-use products working group to evaluate the waste stream in Vermont and possibly recommend additional policies to reduce the impact of single-use products on the state. And so that group did their work and submitted their final report in December of 2019. And that report is available on the Vermont legislative website. And I'm also glad to help direct you to that if you're interested in finding it. I will pass it on now to Melissa Gates from Surfrider to fill us in on their work and her legislative update from New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, where Surfrider is also active.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you to the Connecticut River Conservancy for having Surfrider here. I'm very excited to chat with you today. So yes, I'm Melissa Gates. I'm the Northeast Regional Manager for Surfrider Foundation. And we work to protect the world's ocean, waves, and beaches for all people. And we utilize a vast volunteer network to do that. You'll see here where all the red dots are, those are chapters across the US, and we have youth clubs as well that are colleges and high schools. And here in New England, we have 5 state-based chapters, 1 in each coastal New England state, and me for dedicated policy staff. We work.
Melissa, I'm going to stop you for a minute because what we're seeing is just your first slide, and it's not going through the slideshow. So maybe if you unshare and go to the show, and then try again, we can catch up with you.
Okay, let me click stop share. There we go, share screen again. Let's see, there we go. How are we doing now? Are we on the initiative slide?
Yes.
Yep, that's
Yay, okay, well, here's hoping we continue this way. So Surfrider works across 5 basic initiative areas, including plastic pollution mitigation. So we'll dive right in there on plastics. I think everyone on this Zoom meeting today already understands many of the problems with single-use plastics and packaging, from all the pollution and the impacts to wildlife and our environment. It's definitely making the earth pretty sad. And it's exacerbating our climate crisis, right? Most plastic is made from fossil fuel, which we know we need to be working to get away from rather than increasing. There's also a disproportionate impact to communities of color and low-income communities. And in real life, race is the #1 indicator for citing toxic facilities like petrochemical plants. So at Surfrider, we think it's super important for us to really integrate environmental justice into everything that we do so that we're working to stop that impact. And we really know that to stop plastic pollution, we have to stop making plastic, particularly for things we don't need, like single-use plastics. And there's a ton of good stuff happening right now that's not a standalone solution, right? We have ocean skimmers, we have alternative straws and other single-use products that are degradable and don't contain plastic, a step in the right direction, yet not the paradigm shifting change that we're really looking for to decrease trash and get at zero waste, right? Recycling is a very similar thing. Beach cleanups, another, where we can't really clean our way out of the problem, right? But these are helpful ways that we get to education. So at Surfrider, we have 3 plastic-based programs that work to educate folks. We have Rise Above Plastics, where we really focus on that source reduction or stopping the production of single-use plastics that we don't need by way of bans and other legislation. And through RAP, the Rise Above Plastics program, we educate people about that. Our ocean-friendly restaurants program is both opt-in, so restaurants can join in and adhere to a set of criteria to become ocean-friendly, or our chapters also try to advocate for that program and get a bunch of restaurants in their state or area to join in. We also do beach cleanups, and we have an awesome database that everyone, including you, if you're cleaning up any body of water, salty water in particular, but also rivers, you can enter your own cleanup data by just creating a free account on cleanups.surfrider.org. And I know Stacy plans to share a bunch of links after this presentation today. So don't worry about writing anything down from my slides because we're about to get into some deep stuff, but you will have links to all of these resources afterward. And because we know that there's no way, right? We can't recycle, burn, repackage, or educate our way out of the global climate and plastic pollution crisis. So Surfrider, we take all of our programs and our educational assets and we use them to advance campaigns. And these we define as yes, no, or draw decisions by a governing body to impact the coast. For plastic pollution, these include single-use plastic bans, comprehensive legislation, like what Kathy was mentioning in Vermont, excellent bill, container deposit bills, EPR for circular economy. We're also seeing some movement toward where we have straws that are only on demand. We're seeing that for condiments and cutlery for takeout orders too. So that's happening in New York right now, and we're hoping to bring that to New England. And it's cool that we're seeing progress despite COVID. Another cool thing, I think, is that for plastic bans, we really don't need to start over. We have great working models. We have a lot of data from all over the world and now from increasing parts of the United States where we know what works, right? We can take these lessons and the policy mechanisms we know are required and localize from there. Surfrider has public resources to help you if you're looking to engage in your locality or your state. These 3 toolkits, as well as Beachopedia, which is like an encyclopedia full of beach and coastal factoids, including stuff about plastics. For plastic bag legislation, we know, unfortunately, that something is not better than nothing with bags. We really need to get it right. And by getting it right, we can't ignore paper bags. And that's because we're seeing in places that only ban plastic that paper, of course, is on the rise because it's what's available for free for customers to take. So there's no incentive. While we are seeing the rate of plastic bag consumption going down, which is awesome, what we are seeing again is that rate of paper bag consumption going up. And the plastics industry lobbyists are using that data against us in other parts of the nation to really show that paper is hurting the environment as well, that it takes up more storage space, that it has its own environmental footprint, that it costs more, and that it's a big impact to businesses. They then often distort that fact to say that this means that we shouldn't ban bags at all, when the reality is, of course, that fee helps stores recuperate their costs for paper bags, and it incentivizes customers, right? So we know that we can't really be advancing plastic bag bans without also addressing paper. It just doesn't work because it hurts us in the long run. Straws, there are 3 basic approaches that we follow. A ban on plastic straws is awesome if we can get it. Also banning bioplastic is really key. And then trying to get on demand for those alternative-based straws. The disability community has definitely come out in advocacy for folks who really do need a straw to drink beverages from. And part of what we do at Surfrider is build out our coalition with potentially affected stakeholders so that we can all be a part of the solution. And we don't want to, of course, further disadvantage any population. And so for environmental justice and to arrive there, as well as reaching our environmental goals with plastic reduction, we really need to be inclusive of the entire community and find a working model there. We've been successful at that in Maine and Portland and in a few other municipalities, and we are absolutely going to be bringing some straw legislation forward at the state level and municipal level moving forward. Polystyrene foam bans, there's a lot in there, but basically what we've been advocating for is the foam food packaging. A lot of our ordinances and bills at the state level also get at fillers. And we're trying for the rigid forms as well, the hard plastic that's polystyrene. Vermont set the gold standard that we heard about. That's such a great piece of legislation, and it's inspiring that that came into effect this summer. Maryland had passed a similar bill, but theirs just came into effect in October. Another really good tool in the toolbox for plastic reduction, it's not a standalone solution, it won't fix anything on its own, but part of the whole suite of tools that we need to be advancing concurrently is extended producer responsibility for packaging. It really puts the producers of packaging on the hook for the end of life so that it incentivizes them through a whole complex fee modulation to package things right in the first place, to get at reuse and repurposing and putting less stuff out there that's going to harm the environment. We have a lot of EPR laws already, but packaging is the next big step for the US. And we know that you can't really burn plastic, right? That's a false solution. We can't burn our way out of the plastic pollution crisis. We also know that bioplastic is absolutely not the answer. There's more information on this on Beachipedia if you're interested, but some talking points there too. So for Surfrider's Connecticut River Valley campaigns for plastics, we are absolutely going for the single-use bans, comprehensive legislation, and EPR. We're also working to help update some bottle bills and pass bottle bills where they are not current. We've been really successful on bags at the state level in the Northeast in the last couple of years. We're still working at it in Massachusetts, and in New Hampshire, there's no home rule, which means that localities can't pass local ordinances that contradict the state law. So they need explicit consent from the state to pass local regs. However, the cool thing in New Hampshire is that we really firmly believe and have legal opinions to back up that local authority is already inherent to pass single-use plastics regulations in the state's solid waste laws. So Portsmouth, we helped them pass a citywide foam ban that will take effect December 31st of this year. And we have this great coalition of residents really taking action to drive single-use plastic ordinances at the local level across New Hampshire, as well as taking action at the state level and federal level. So that's a pretty exciting thing, and you can join that if you're a New Hampshire resident. We have a big coalition list of folks. We're also going to see some straw bills in all three of the Connecticut River Valley states that Surfrider works in. There'll also be straw ordinances coming out at the local level. Polystyrene bans, we've also been successful in this area in many states, which is excellent. We'll see state bills in all three of the salty watered states of the Connecticut River Valley. And we had some recent wins at the town level too, in Sudbury, Massachusetts, and Stamford, Connecticut. So that comprehensive legislation, we really may see some of this pop up in the states as well. We'll see. We're trying to encourage legislators to be as bold as they feel they can be. We're absolutely going to see EPR bills. There's activity on that in a lot of our Northeast states. So that's another great way to engage at the state level to really get at plastic pollution reduction. And again, we can't do EPR alone because it helps fix our recycling system that's really broken, of course, and our failing infrastructure and all that. And it helps take the burden off from taxpayers for the products that are put on our shelves that we then have nothing to do with and can't recycle locally. But we still need to stop making as much stuff in the first place, which is why we need all of these prongs concurrently. The Federal Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act is another awesome thing that's happening right now that everyone can engage in. We have an action alert live at the link provided here on the screen, but this bill is like, you know, the best of the best, all of the plastic pollution goals that we could hope for in the United States, all under one bill. And this bill provides a great roadmap for states to follow as well, and even localities, where, you know, if your state already has a ban on bags, like Connecticut has a ban on bags, so you could pull from the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act another section of the law to bring as a standalone bill. For states that don't yet have all the components, you could package this up as a state bill. And we're working right now at Surfrider to encourage state legislators to do just this, to bring concurrent legislation where we're working at multiple prongs, right? So we're pressing for that single-use bag ban. We're pressing for, you know, foam and rigid and all forms of polystyrene to get rid of this stuff that's so toxic to our health and to our environment. And we're also pressing at the local level, which we know creates the case for support of state legislation. And then with enough states coming in with varying plastics laws, we will then get to the point where we can really press for sweeping federal legislation like the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. So it's an exciting time to be working in this field. Awareness is really on the uprise that plastic pollution is something we need to worry about now. It is a staggering amount of plastic that we make and put out into the world, and we need to stop being reckless with it. So thank you all for joining in today and for doing your part to learn more about what's happening and learn more about the issues to really take action to drive the needed change. And with that, I'm going to pass, with any luck here, pass my screen off to Kirstie Pecci with CLF to talk a little bit more about what else is happening in our region here. So thank you all for listening. And let's see, passing over to Kirstie, who's on mute.
Mute. Hello, everybody. I think I shared my, let me see. There we go. Did it share my screen?
Yep.
Are you seeing just the one screen, not the sidebar and?
Yep. Yep. We're good.
Okay. All right. So my name is Kirstie Pecci. I'm the director of the Zero Waste Project at CLF. CLF is an organization, I guess we're a nonprofit that's been around since the mid-60s, and we use the law, science, and the market to protect human health, our homes, and the environment. The Zero Waste Project we began in January of 2017. We do work in all 6 New England states. CLF runs across the New England states. I'm actually in the midst of interviewing for a Northern States attorney to work in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. So if you know anybody you think would be interested, let me know. And we are the Zero Waste Project, just it's in the title. We go by the, the zero waste hierarchy is our Bible. This is a simplified version of the hierarchy: rethink and redesign up top, reduce, reuse, and only then after we've done that, and I would say redesign is one of the most important components. Keep reducing, redesigning, rethinking, and reusing over and over again. Once we've done everything we can there, then turning to recycling and composting and materials management. Right now, our waste system in New England, almost all of it's going into landfills and incinerators, let's be honest. And even though all 6 states have adopted similar hierarchies to this, we're not adhering to them, and we need to do better. I can talk at length about that, but we're going to talk today just about plastics. Let's see. Oh, let me see if I. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit, take a step back, because a lot of this good stuff that Melissa mentioned gets complicated very quickly, and she already did a lot of the overview and important pieces of this stuff. So I'll dig into some of the little pieces of it that she didn't have time to. As she said, plastic is, we want to talk about the plastic life cycle. Where does it come from? Where does it go? And how is it polluting at every level? That plastic use is increasing precipitously, and solutions for moving beyond plastic. As Melissa said, the plastic is made almost entirely of fossil fuels. As a result, it's coming out of the ground, where we want to keep that oil in the soil, and we're not doing that if we're making plastics. Plastics really are the last gasp of the fossil fuel industry, because they know that we're going to be turning to solar and other actual renewable resources to run our cars, heat our homes, run our businesses. And so they are trying to sell plastics as much as they can, very clearly. This is the plastics life cycle. It's not a life cycle of any sort. It's extraction, refinement, consumption, waste, and then it ends up in the environment in one way or another. Plastics are polluting at every stage. As Melissa said, we will be sharing these slides, so I'm not going to go into every detail, but when you extract, you are creating a tremendous environmental problem in the region, running from actual earthquakes, from destabilizing the underlayer of under our earth, to large pools of toxic leachate water from the actual wells. Fracking is a filthy, filthy process. Refining fossil fuels to make plastic resins is also a filthy, filthy process. And that's why as Melissa also mentioned, we find that these facilities, refining facilities, are also in environmental justice and low-income communities. This is a terrible, terrible polluting set of facilities. What is often ignored is that consuming plastics is very dangerous. And when you use plastic, when we have a bottle, a cup, anything made out of plastic, we are getting plastic in those containers. We are getting plastic in our, all in the plastic are leaching into our food in different ways and leaching into our drinks. One of the things I find most terrifying is when people are drinking hot acidic coffee out of a styrofoam cup, for instance, or drinking that coffee out of a number 6 cover, which is what most coffee cup covers are. That's polystyrene, just not an expanded form. That's very filthy and has got a lot of contaminants in it that are really going right into our bodies. As we also mentioned already, burning plastic makes the problem worse. One thing that I want to spend a second on, and then people may have questions on, there's been a real push by the incineration industry to not call burning trash incineration. The reason for that is because many people know that incineration is dangerous and that there are many pollutants that emerge from the stack, and that there's ash created, toxic ash created, that then has to go into a landfill. Plastic is especially terrible to burn because it's very dangerous, because dioxin is created when you burn certain types of plastic, not to mention other contaminants. So that framing, they've tried to shift it and to call these different high heat technologies different things. Pyrolysis, gasification, and now we see chemical recycling. The difference between these technologies is usually that there's either air involved in the heating of the material, or not involved in the heating of the material, or air inserted at different points, or that the material is broken down and then that resulting gas or oil, sludge, or materials are then burned in another facility or in a different chamber. That doesn't change the fact that you're actually burning plastic. And so we have to make sure that we're vigilant against any high heat technology, whether it's gasification, pyrolysis, incineration, or chemical recycling, and understand that burning these materials, whether you're breaking it down first and then burning it or not, is still very, very polluting. And again, this is not recycling. Chemical recycling is not recycling. There's a very, very small portion, less than 10%, that has been actually made into other plastic from these brand new chemical recycling facilities. What they're really doing is breaking it down to burn the oil and gas. And what we need to do is to shut off this plastic spigot and stop incentivizing many times incineration and this type of infrastructure, because it's not infrastructure that's going to solve the problem, as is already discussed. Another way in which plastic pollutes at every stage is how plastics enter the environment. One of the questions in the chat that I just saw, and please let me know if I'm missing another question that's relevant as we go through. One of the questions in the chat was an assumption that, a question as to whether the US is where this plastic is entering the environment from. Most definitely the US is pumping plastic into the environment in a few different ways. One of them is that straightforward plastic litter. That's a real problem, and that's entering the environment. And as we already heard, a lot of that is in the rivers and being collected by organizations like CRC, which is just a shame. You're not going to capture it all. It's going to be in there. If we don't turn off the spigot, you can work as hard as you want. You're never going to get all the plastic out of your ocean or river that's in there. We need to stop putting it in entirely. Another issue, as we already heard about from Andrea, is microplastics. About 60% of our clothing is made of plastic. Polyester, nylon. These are all plastic materials made of fossil fuels. That plastic, and there's a lot of other names for it. If you look up the names, you'll find that many of the, and if it's not cotton, linen, or wool, many times it's some kind of plastic. That plastic is entering our environment through our washing machines. That water is now got microplastics in it. So if that water goes into a sewer system, that's ending up in our rivers. And also that plastic is entering the environment, microplastics, through our clothing being dried in dryers. So, we're looking at different ways to minimize that exposure, minimize those pieces of microplastic going into the environment. But that's one of the main ways that we think that surface water, rivers and lakes, are being affected by microplastics, and where a lot of that microplastic is coming from, which is really dangerous because those pieces are so small, they're getting into our bodies when we breathe them in. As already stated, the plastic industry, whether it's fracking, pipelines, chemical plants, incinerators, are often in low-income communities. 6 of the 7 incinerators in Massachusetts are in low-income communities. Environmental justice communities, as we define them here in Massachusetts. So we're finding that during COVID, folks who are also the sickest from COVID are also the ones who live near these plants. I don't think it's any accident that people whose lung capacity has already been compromised by living, say, near a petrochemical plant or a fracking well or an incinerator, then would not be able to fight off COVID as well. As was also referenced, and I'll get into a deeper dive on, plastic recycling doesn't really work. It's really limited. What we mean by this is pretty straightforward in some ways, but hard to get your arms around sometimes. Only number 1, number 2, and number 5 plastics have any kind of a market in the United States. The reason for this is because plastic doesn't recycle well, as I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. So as a result of that, plastic is not getting recycled. It's too expensive to collect and sort plastic, as a lot of these waste companies have been saying they've been doing over the years. It's not happening. It hasn't happened. What we were doing was sending a lot of mixed plastics to China, where they were sorting a lot of it out. China has refused now to accept any loads that have more than 0.5% of contamination in them. So as a result, China was our dumping ground. And now the United States can no longer do this because China won't allow it anymore. What's happened then is that a lot of our plastics from the United States, not as much from New England, but other places, are going to other countries that also don't have a magic way to separate out this plastic in a cost-effective way and make it into new plastic. There are also actual limitations in plastic recycling in that you can only recycle plastic a few times. So when we see a life cycle analysis, for instance, between a plastic bottle and a glass bottle or a aluminum can of some sort, please remember that regardless of the energy used, you could refill a glass bottle 40, 50 times and then recycle it endlessly. You could refill an aluminum container and then recycle an aluminum container endlessly. Plastic can only be recycled a few times and it can't be refilled. And that's only assuming that we manage to make it cost effective to have a clean sorted load, which most systems in the United States, certainly curbside, just don't do. We're seeing a huge, huge rise in how much plastic is being produced. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but as I said, the petrochemical industry is looking at this and saying, if we don't make plastic, we're not going to make anything. So instead, they're really pushing plastic as the answer to everything, and investing in new infrastructure, especially, again, in environmental justice communities like in Cancer Alley. And they're spending billions of dollars to try and develop all of these different levels of the infrastructure, including burning at the end, because only if they can keep making new plastic and keep that pipeline going can they continue to make money. Plastic is terrible for the climate for the reasons stated before. All the pollution and then all the energy use that we're talking about obviously has a huge climate impact as well. So what can we do? A lot of the tools that Melissa already mentioned are very workable and really make a big difference. The materials that do get, for instance, recycled, for instance, containers, are deposit return system receptacles. For instance, The glass in the Northeast is getting recycled. Only the bottle bill glass is getting recycled. The 5% bottle-to-bottle recycling that was on an earlier slide, that's from the bottle bill states. Most of the recycling that's happening of beverage containers in this country is from bottle bill states, the 10 bottle bill states. And the reason for that is those materials are sorted, cleanly sorted already. So you don't have a load that's got different types of plastic in it, or different pieces of paper in the plastic, or pieces of glass in the paper, that kind of stuff. So it makes a huge difference. So we think that and we've been working to get a deposit return system in all 6 of the New England states. New Hampshire and Rhode Island don't have them. And then also to modernize the systems throughout New England. Maine's is probably in the best shape, but the other states, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Vermont's a little bit better shape than the others, but need to include all the beverage containers if we're really going to make it work. And we need to keep increasing the fee so that incentivizes people bringing their bottles and cans back. Melissa already mentioned extended producer responsibility. That's huge, because no corporation, as she said, no corporation is going to redesign their goods unless we force them to do so. And if they are responsible for taking care of the end cost of recycling or disposing of the product, before you know it, we've seen this in Europe and Canada, they redesign their packaging so that it then is reusable and actually recyclable. That's not going to happen unless we force that. And then again, we're moving towards reusable and refillable containers. That's how we achieve that true circularity that Kathy mentioned, the circular economy we mentioned. So instead of a single-use bottle or can that's ending up in the river and needs to be picked up, we have a reusable system, a refillable system that keeps on happening. So we've already heard about the bag ban, so I'm not going to go into too much about that, but we have a lot more work to do on this. And then same with the polystyrene bans. I think that one thing that's really important to note too is that when we say that these bills work, we mean they really work. When you increase the deposit, for instance, Michigan's got a 92% rate. Rhode Island, which doesn't have a bottle bill, has got a 39% recycling rate of containers. So these systems, when we say they work, we know that they really work well. And there are refillable systems happening in Oregon and Quebec. We can make that happen through New England too. We've already talked about EPR for packaging. One of the most important pieces of this, though, that I would consider very closely is that we want to make sure that our agencies, our state agencies, and our local recycling systems that exist already have control over how this works. Because unfortunately, we've seen some systems in which producer responsibility comes out of the gate for packaging, for instance, and the corporations are in charge of it, and that ends up being a lot of incineration. So we want to make sure that we're supporting recycling systems that exist and reforming them so actual recycling is happening. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we're as efficient as possible in incentivizing redesign of those products. The other thing I would say, and Melissa touched on this, local bans are very important to statewide bans happening. I totally agree with Melissa's she mentioned the legal analysis around whether New Hampshire has the ability to pass bans. If the towns are responsible for taking care of trash, then the towns are responsible for taking care of plastic too. 11% of our trash is plastic. So we really encourage local bans and try and support them, and we're part of the one in New Hampshire as well. As you can see, this is a team effort between a lot of different groups. And we feel that those bans are why change has happened at the state level. In Massachusetts, we haven't been as successful at passing some of the bans as I would like, but what we are seeing in Massachusetts are other kinds of bans happening, like bottle bans, plastic bottle bans. There are about a dozen cities and towns in Massachusetts that have banned plastic water bottles, including some that have banned plastic water bottles and soda bottles. I think that's going to be the way we get the bottle bill modernized in Massachusetts. And I think the municipal power is really huge because the municipalities are bearing the cost too. So we want to do a really good job of supporting our municipalities, but also bringing their voices to the state level. And we're working with Surfrider and CRC and other coalition members at each state to bring this legislation forward. This new legislative session for all the states starts in January. So we're spending the fall drafting bills, pulling the best practice bills that Melissa talked about and some of the great toolkits that Surfrider has done, making sure people have seen those, but also working to fix some of the bills, like the producer responsibility bill that was proposed in Maine and the one that was proposed in Massachusetts, and tweaking them to get some lessons learned incorporated in those bills, and working with our legislators very aggressively. I've got a meeting with a bunch of legislators next week to make sure that they put these forward. So anything you can do to talk to your legislators, anything you can do to empower your town or talk to your town officials and or city officials and get them involved is really huge on all this stuff. That's how we're going to make this happen. So yeah, we need to get away from toxicity. We need to get towards reusable and refillable, get away from single use. And we're doing it, as Melissa said, at the state level, regionally, and then also working at the local level as well, and trying to bring everybody's voices and amplify them at the state level as much as possible. That's my email address. Of course, everyone can reach out to me individually afterwards, and that's my Twitter handle. I find that Twitter works really well for getting reporters and legislators to take notice of things. So please follow me. And as was already said, we'll be sharing all these materials afterwards, as well as some other interesting articles about how we got into this plastics mess in the first place. And we'd be happy to hear from people if people have comments or questions afterwards. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you so much, Kirstie. That was great. And Melissa. So we want to leave a little time for questions for people to answer, but I just want to reiterate, the call to action, we really need your help. So lobby for laws. You can sign up for through all 3 organizations. We have action alerts where you can sign up and be notified when it's time to contact your legislator. And for some of the smaller states, like Vermont in particular, I've been told 5 constituents contact a legislator on an issue and they think it is on fire. So it really does not take that much.
That's true for Massachusetts too. That's not just it's not just a small state thing. You know, I've heard 5 to 8.
So let's answer some of the questions here. And Stacy, I'll hand it over to you to kind of read the questions and we can all sort of jump in to answer.
Great. Yeah, thanks to you both for these awesome information. There was so much flying at us. So one person would like some clarification on what is bioplastic and why is it not good? The word bio makes us feel like it's a better solution or a better option.
Either of us, I think, can answer it. Do you want to, Melissa, or do you want me to?
Sure, yeah, the slide that I put up about it was real brief, but basically bioplastic is just plastic produced from renewable biomass sources like corn, for example, but it still has the polymers in it, and it still requires precise conditions under which to degrade. A lot of people assume that they're going to take a bioplastic cup, for example, and throw it away and that they've done something good because it's just going to degrade. But the reality is that it needs precise conditions of light, oxygen, and temperature in order to actually break down, which of course, if it's going to be incinerated, doesn't have that. If it's going to a landfill, also doesn't have any of that. It also poses significant threats to wildlife immediately upon littering. And the standards and definitions legally are just really weak, making it easy to kind of circumvent and contravene the intents of legislation that allows for bioplastic as a go-to. Consumer education on composting is also really weak in an area that absolutely needs more attention. The same for accessibility to composting and curbside composting so that it's free and accessible. Right now, the city of Portsmouth has some great composting programs. There are a couple peppered throughout the rest of New England, but it's just not accessible enough and people don't yet understand it enough to really fully make it a good working policy mechanism for our legislation. And so what we're really striving for with these single-use plastic bans and fee hybrids, I should say too, is a paradigm shift in consumer behavior to reject single-use plastics, right? And we want to ban single-use plastics and not make new type of plastic the new go-to that still has the same host of problems, although it's not coming from fossil fuels, so that's one step. But it's not a great solution. We should be advocating, again, to get away from single-use anything, whether that's paper or bioplastic or plastic. We should really be striving toward reusable, refillable. And so that's kind of the skinny on that.
I think it's important to note too that there's a big difference between bioplastic, biodegradable plastic and compostable plastics too. Like really look at whatever you get, really look at what it is, what it says it is on the bottom or on the package, and read what you're supposed to do with it, because Melissa's right. Most of it's not compostable at all. And then most of it is, even if it is compostable, needs really specific conditions. So much better to skip, as she said, to reusables.
And that's the problem, even when they say compostable, that you can't just throw it in the trash and expect it to compost. And often it requires industrial type composting, not just backyard composting. So it's a bit misleading. And at Surfrider, we really look at it as a form of greenwashing, where companies are still trying to turn a profit to sell us something of convenience that they're pitching as a good, viable alternative that really has its own unique problems and still has toxic stuff in it, right? It's not like it's, you know, made of leaves and roses, right? So anyway, thanks for the question.
Well, this is not a question, but just addressing reusables. One of Catherine mentions that, oh, sorry, it wasn't Catherine. Oh, Elizabeth, taking the option to buy reusable straws instead of taking the plastic straw that is, you know, often given. So I just want to shout out Elizabeth for that. I don't see any more actual questions in the chat, so I would invite anybody on the line, if they would like to turn off their mute and ask a question, that would be great. We could, Kathy, did you address all the things in this next step slide? Because we could then take off the slides and see everybody, if that's a better way to have a conversation.
Yeah, sure, that's fine.
Okay.
We have a couple minutes left, so.
Yeah. So we'll stop the share, and if folks can put themselves in gallery view, then you can see who's here. And if anybody would like to ask a question, feel free to either raise your hand or we can wrap up in another way.
Well, there was a question from Catherine about what's being done at the global level to address plastic waste ending up in waterways. And she said, my assumption is that the US is not a primary cause of the plastic that ends up in the water. There was a good slide, but it wasn't on for very long. Melissa, you had one, I think, about like the US being the second biggest source of plastics. On the other hand, I've seen slides identifying different rivers of the world as being like the most contributor to ocean plastics. And so those aren't in the US, but I think if the US is feeding plastic to those places, then we are part of the problem. I don't know if you want to expand on that.
I'm happy to.
Absolutely true, Andrea. And I think just another plug for the federal Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, that a big section in there relates to exports and plastic exports. You know, we often hear plastics lobbyists, opponents saying that, oh, the plastic pollution problem isn't an American problem. It's all coming from developing nations. Well, if you look at the brand audits that have happened, you can look those up on breakfreefromplastic.org, which is a huge movement of just hundreds of great folks and nonprofits gathering together to work on plastic pollution at that global scale, as well as the national scale, as well as the state and then local scale, so that it all kind of funnels up in the right direction with unity. But you can see in there that, you know, all the brands that are pumping out the plastics are a lot of them American brands, that we are exporting a ton of plastic, exporting a ton of trash. And that's really where the problem comes from. I did drop a link into the chat. I think that was Andrea, perhaps what you were mentioning with the graph about the rivers and how much they are bringing plastic into the ocean as well. There's some great data in that report there too for folks to look at. But our key really, again, is to stop making plastic for the things that we don't need plastic for, which are clearly, you know, the single-use things that we're just going to throw away. There's no reason why companies can't repackage. We have EPR for packaging laws all over the EU and all over Canada, and they're working super well, and companies are not going bankrupt. They are repackaging. And that's what we'll hopefully bring here too. We made a lot of progress in Maine last year. We'll do that again. We're bringing EPR, you know, all throughout New England, as well as on the West Coast in the Pacific Northwest states. So.
Great. Bonnie Jean, why don't you ask?
Thank you. This is my first time joining you. I found out about you by pulling water chestnuts this summer with Kelsey.
Great,
So with response to plastic, towards the end of the program, one of you, and I apologize for not remembering whom, said that 11% of our trash is plastic, and I'm wondering what that metric is. Is
So
it weight?
I said that. So if you look at the disposal numbers in each state, I was comparing disposal numbers last night, and 11% of what we throw away into our landfills and incinerators is plastic. So I have that number from Massachusetts.
Okay, but what's the metric? Is it 11% by weight, by volume?
In waste, we almost always use tonnage.
Tonnage, thank you.
Yep. So 11% of the tonnage we're disposing of in our incinerators and landfills is plastic. When you think about how light plastic is, that is a tremendous amount of plastic. Yeah. And then also we're recycling, you know, it differs state by state, but if you look at the recycling that we have in our states, the single stream recycling is about 25% contamination coming into the materials recycling facilities, the sorting facilities. And there's a lot of contamination in the loads going out too. And a lot of the plastic things, filmy plastic is not recyclable. Small things like caps and straws are not recyclable. Only number 1, number 2, and number 5 plastics are recyclable. So if it said that little triangle tells you what kind of a polymer it is, if it doesn't say 1, 2, or 5 on it, there's no market for it. There might be technically a lab somewhere that can recycle it, but there's no way for the there's no place for the recycling sorting company to bring it.
And I just want to add into that, just to say that even though some of the things are recyclable in theory, many places, my municipality included, will not recycle anything but number 2 plastic right now. So even if you sort them and bring them, it depends on what's happening at your municipal level and your state level with what you can actually recycle. And that's been a contentious issue in policy as well, to make sure that we're clearly defining in our legislation what we mean by recyclable. Like, it doesn't help us if it's recyclable in, you know, California while we're here in New England, right? I mean, it's good for them, but anyway.
Yeah, I like to say, in fact, I like to use the term not recyclable, but will get recycled. Because recyclable in a lab doesn't mean there's any place to send it. And because we make new plastic so cheap by subsidizing the oil industry, we've killed recycling markets. And the plastic companies, there's actually now a story that I've sent to Stacy and Kathy so that they can share it with all of you. The plastic companies sent all their files to the universities from years ago. And in those files, they have notes saying, yeah, we know plastic's not recyclable. It's never going to get recycled. It's not recyclable. Their whole business model is based on the idea that they can sell the new plastic the next day. So they've admitted that. And now they're trying this new way of saying it's recycling, chemical recycling, which is also bullshit, pardon my French. So we have to really guard against that and recognize it's plastic is always a bad idea. Single use is always a bad idea, but plastic is always a bad idea. If you can avoid it in any way, shape, or form, you should.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Let me just say one thing, Bonnie. I know we are at the end of the hour. Happy to stay on for a little bit longer if people would like, but I just want to acknowledge that our time is officially up, and if people need to go, I want to respect your time and give huge thank you to Kirstie and Melissa, to Kathy and Andrea for presenting, and to everyone for coming out. And feel free to keep talking, because this is great. We've just scratched the surface, and there's obviously so much.
So my follow-up question could be really long, or it could be really short. Plastic fabric, is that included in the trash and plastic, or is fabric its own?
Nope, fabric is its own thing. So Plastic, when they're talking about plastic, it's just really the packaging type stuff, and then a few of the rigid plastics that are reusable are probably put in the plastic 11% category. Clothing, textiles are about 6 to 8%, textiles in all, in our disposal. So disposal is a whole nother thing, and please, please, I have a zero waste update that talks about landfills, incinerators. You know, I just sent some comments in about a landfill expansion in Maine yesterday. I do all, you know, we do a lot of different stuff. The textiles recycling really works. Textiles reuse really works, but because of the plastic component, and because again, sometimes stuff gets sent, for instance, to Africa, and if it's not used, ends up in their landfills. We need to make sure that we do a good job with our textile recycling. Step one is getting it out of our landfills or incinerators, though, where it's 6 to 8%. So yeah, it's very recyclable. There's money to be made there even, and very reusable, especially New England clothes because they're warm. So we can do a lot there, which is a whole nother topic. But yeah, it's that part of the plastics problem is separate.
It's separate. Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, and I'd add that a big part of the microplastics problem is coming from fabrics and from our clothing that contains plastics and synthetics, because they're so tiny and our washing machine cycles agitate the clothing that tiny particulates break off and they don't get filtered out through our washing machines. So they wind up in our systems and into the groundwater. And Andrea probably knows a great wealth more than I do about that. But I know there are some companies working on filter systems for washing machines, as well as some cool little devices that everyone can buy if you have an extra $15. There's a Cora ball is the one I can think of right now that you plug into your washing machine. It's just a little ball that collects plastic microfibers and hair, by the way. I have some, so I know, speak from experience there. But it's a great way to decrease the amount of plastics that wash out of your washing machine from plastic textiles.
Maybe you could add that. We can put it in the email follow-up, because that sounds like something very practical we can all do.
Yep. Melissa, wait, not to jump too deep in the weeds, but we're doing some research on that, Melissa, too, at CLF. I've got an intern putting some time into it. I'm also looking for which fabrics are the worst and if there's ways to treat them, because while individual responsibility is important, as we've all been saying, it's really more important to fix the upstream problem. So if there was a way we could say to manufacturers, these are the materials you shouldn't use, or at the state level, require that everyone put certain devices in their washer or dryer, or the dryers and washers be built with certain devices, for instance. We want those big picture solutions. So, yeah, so if you find anything else, Melissa, about that, please share it with me too. The deeper stuff that someone who's not a waste nerd might not be interested in, but I really want to put some time into that. Yeah, because it's a problem.
And just say, you know, the Cora ball and devices like it are not a solution, of course. It's the simple thing to, like, conducting a beach cleanup, which is really helpful. We want to remove the plastic and other debris before it winds up in the ocean waters and in our rivers. But it's not going to stop it at the source. It's not going to turn that faucet off. So we have been exploring a little bit extended producer responsibility type legislation for washing machines. But the problem comes into play that these machines are made to last 20 years or so. So a lot of folks who have bought new washing machines are going to have those same washing machines for, you know, quite a while. So for this legislation to be effective now, we're kind of out of luck there. And that's where devices like the Cora ball, which only has about a 33% efficacy rate, so it doesn't remove a ton or even most of the plastic fragments and bits, but some is better than none in that case. And we encourage people to, you know, try to buy whole cotton fabrics that don't contain plastic in the meantime.
Are there companies like Patagonia, for instance, who's been such a huge fleece promoter, or are they starting to change their ways? And, you know, or are there some companies that are?
Well, it is a problem because, as Melissa just said, the clothing problem has some of the same elements as the packaging problem, right? A lot of actual bottles and plastic bottles have been made into clothing, right? Like that, you know, so it's not circular, but at least it's downcycling and recycling in some way. issue with that is while it's good to be recycling the plastic on some level if it exists and to use it, not only do you want the clothes to then be made into clothes and recycled, which I think Patagonia is working towards and trying to do as well, which is good. The other problem is, as we just said, those microfibers from production of the material, the clothes, are out into the world. They must be rinsing those clothes as part of the production and recycling of the fabric. So there's a microplastic problem there. But then you have a fleece coat that you're, or fleece jacket that you're washing, and there are microplastics coming out of your washer and your dryer. So we really need to not only, we need to be thinking about circularity and sustainability in a way that is more comprehensive and upstream. And we want to recycle our clothes, but before we recycle, just as we do with all waste, we want to reduce, and we want to reuse, and we want to redesign. So as Melissa said, you want to go for hemp and cotton and silk and
bamboo
linen and wool, yeah.
Bamboo clothing is awesome.
Yeah.
Soft.
Yeah. So all those, like anything, if you can do that, you're going to be doing better, and that's better. But we need, again, it can't just be about individual choices. It has to be about changing the system. So we need to do that systemic change across the board. And that's why I want to figure out if there are ways, if you're producing plastic, fiber, and textiles, if there are ways for those companies to handle some of that offshedding, those microfibers too. And maybe we start regulating that too. So Patagonia is trying to do a good thing, I think, compared to a lot of places, but there's a lot of microfibers out there because of those Patagonia fleeces. So it's not, it's like the bioplastics. There's an intent there, sometimes to do a good thing. Sometimes it's just greenwashing. It depends on the company. And then what do you do with it afterwards? So,
and to be fair to Patagonia, because they are a really forward-thinking, environmentally friendly company, we didn't know what we didn't know when we didn't know it.
That's right. That's a really good point.
When we first started looking at the plastic pollution problem, we didn't know as much about nanoplastics and microplastics as we now know. We didn't know how pervasive of a problem plastic pollution really was, and how deep in the muck of it we really are. So I find comfort knowing that we do have companies like Patagonia and like Grain Surfboards and like, all of your green leaning companies out there who are trying to do the right thing, and they're investing in exploring new types of fabrics to still meet the high quality mark that they need to meet for their products. And I think, that innovation is really key to bringing us to the next level at stopping plastic pollution from a corporate level. We can't legislate that, but it's a good thing for companies to really start looking at, to investing in innovation at that level, the corporate level.
And I think if you compared Patagonia to others, using the markers that we would recommend regarding toxicity, water use, and then reuse of fibers and cloth, I think they're way ahead of other companies. So it's not to, I totally agree with Melissa. They're doing really good stuff. It's just, we need to try and find holistic solutions. We can't just do, and then Melissa made this point earlier too. You don't want to just pass a ban. You don't want to just pass EPR. We really need to change our whole system. And what that means is digging into these issues until we really achieve sustainability and circularity.
Yeah.
And I guess I would just conclude that thought on Kirstie by saying that Surfrider does look at bans as a solution. If we do only one thing, we should be stopping the production of single-use plastics. But of course, the best path toward really solving the problem is to look at this comprehensively and to approach it at the local, at the state, at the federal, at the global level, which I think we're doing right now and doing fairly effectively. So thank you.
Great. Thanks so much to both of you for joining us today. And your expertise is so valuable, and the partnership, I think, is so valuable in terms of continuing to educate folks about this. And so we will continue this fight and this effort. And I just want to thank everyone. Stacy will follow up with an email that will have links to the different action alerts and ways that you can get involved. And we're here to help you figure it out, and I really appreciate your joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you again, Stacy and Kathy. And
Thank
Alika.
you. If you two
Bye.
want to stay on for a minute, we can
Okay.
just chat. Thanks, Bonnie Jean and Catherine.
I'm doing my best to
Nice
leave.
to have you. No worries.